On this episode of the Notorious POD, I speak with my good friend, Tim Hudak, who is the CEO of the Ontario Real Estate Association, about sort of some of the policies and proposals that are happening in Canada, as well as what they have put forth in the province of Ontario for dealing with affordable housing. It's an amazing conversation, and here we go.
This is Notorious POD, the podcast for the best informed people in the real estate industry. Rob Hahn is your host, and Notorious is where the real estate industry comes for real talk with no bullshit.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Notorious POD. I am obviously your host, the Notorious ROB. It's wonderful to have you, and today I'm actually really excited because, if there's a theme I think that I've been working on consistently over since I sort of started doing more of these sort of more professional, podcasts, it's around affordability, housing affordability. I mean, last week we talked about, the causes of it, at least in the US, with Tobias Peter of AEI. And this week I have another special guest who really knows the topic and really knows what he's talking about. It's a good friend of mine. And let's bring him on, Mr. Tim Hudak. How are you, Tim?
Rob Hahn, I'm thrilled. I'm on the Notorious POD. This is fantastic.
Whatever. It's like such a small little, podcast. But I like to pride to say, the listeners, the quality, not the quantity, right? Because the topics we're talking about are pretty high level, pretty sophisticated stuff. But so I forgot to do the full on intro. You are the CEO of OREA, Ontario Real Estate Association. But you have quite a history, and for not everyone knows, obviously I do, but give us a little 30-second blurb of like how you ended up where you are.
Yeah, sure. So Ontario Real Estate Association. So we would be the fourth largest realtor organization in North America. I think we're just behind California, Florida, and Texas. We're about 94,000 realtors in Ontario. I'm sure a lot of viewers know about Ontario, but basically think of Ontario as a combo of New York, California, and Michigan. That's right. What it plays in Canada. That makes any sense. A big manufacturing sector, the Center of Financial Services out of the city of Toronto, our largest city in Canada. And then California's because we're about 42% of the provincial economy. So we make the national economy make a big impact. And me, so I've been the CEO at OREA since the end of 2016. Before that, I will confess, Rob, that I spent 21 years in politics. I'm a recovering politician, but I rose up to be the leader of the opposition, minority leader in the province of Ontario for the Conservative Party. When I didn't win the election as premier/governor, I said, all right, and voters sent me a message. I got close. I was 200,000 or so votes shy, but I was still shy. I took on a job I was really excited when it came to home ownership, and that's become the CEO of OREA. And then I met you, and I'm on the Notorious POD.
That's right.
That's right.
What you're forgetting is that you're also a radio host, I believe, right? Are you still doing that?
I got laid off. Thanks for bringing it up. It
just explains how you're so good in this format, is my point.
Yeah. So I have been a radio host as well on a station called News Talk 1010. It's the top talk show station out of the city of Toronto. And it goes national too. But they had consolidation. The big media giant, the Bell Canada, started laying off weekend hosts. The first time in my life I got laid off, so I lost my
man. You could always just start a new, do the Joe Rogan thing. Become the Joe Rogan of real estate politics, man. I'm telling you, we need that. But listen, I think your political background is actually really relevant for what we're going to talk about today. Because we're going to talk about affordability. We're going to talk about housing. And so people don't know, Canada, you guys are roughly a tenth the size of the US. But if I'm not mistaken, housing affordability is even a bigger issue for you guys than it is for us here in the US. Was that roughly correct?
Yeah, for sure. The rapid acceleration of prices resemble the worst of American markets, I think, and then even more. But I think about it why. I think because Canada's population tends to be more centered in a fewer number of cities.
Right.
The biggest area would be Vancouver, British Columbia, which is surrounded by, I guess, much like Seattle, right? Surrounded by mountain and then ocean, and then Toronto, where I am today, where we've created our own sort of mountain of regulation and red tape and NIMBYism. So we're just not getting homes built, far worse in the States, largely because of that inflexibility on the supply side.
Yeah. So just from a statistical standpoint, we talked about just how the top line number here for last month was 19% price increase year over year for US as a whole. What is it in Canada?
So Canada-wide, it was 20, so roughly the same ballpark. But my province, Ontario, was 26. The greater Toronto area was 28% year on year as of February.
Jesus Christ!
Our cottage country has been hotter, where Georgian Bay was just short of 40. It was 39%. So you're seeing
39%
pressures there. Yeah. And since 2018, most of our markets are up 100% right across the province.
Yeah. And wages have also doubled, right? It's since 2018. Is that
something like that?
Yeah, far short of it. So, out of curiosity, what has wages done since 2018, 2019?
Geez, that's a good question. It's actually one of my slide decks, but I'm lazy. I just put up on a graph the blue line and the green line. So the blue line is smaller than the green line. I think probably, and it's actually gone up and down. 18 through 22 weren't exactly consistently great years. So some years I think it actually went down slightly. I'll say an average in that time frame, Rob, probably less than 2%. So accumulation maybe around 7%.
Right. So here's one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk to you about this, because I look at Canada, and in many respects, I think Canada leads the way of where we're going to end up, especially when it comes sort of like government action regulation. So, for example, you guys had, a few years ago, you had the British Columbia, coming down and sort of taking away, self-regulation for real estate because of the whole, shadow flipping thing. As a rule, I think Canada, y'all tend to be a little bit more activist in terms of regulation and government. So when I look at a lot of these affordability issues, some of the things that I've been talking about down here is, look, this is going to have an impact, right? This is going to lead to political parties. It's going to lead to legislation. It's going to lead to new types of regulation to try and deal with affordability. And not that it's law yet, but, the Liberal Party in Canada has come out with a proposal. And I looked at it, I said, because there's a very good chance we're going to see something like this, here as well, right? And it's called the Home Buyers Bill of Rights. And I'm looking through this stuff and I'm like, man, I need to talk to Tim to see if I understand what the hell this is. So first of all, let me just start right there. Like, you're familiar with the Home Buyers Bill of Rights. What is it exactly? What is it trying to accomplish?
It's basically a series of initiatives at our national level to, I guess, consumer protection initiatives to stand up for frustrated buyers who are, just like in the States, the victims of increased demand and limited supply. I just want to go back to your first thought, too, because I've been thinking the exact same thing. Typically, I love going to the States. I just love going to the States. I lived there for a while myself. But the conferences, because I could see American trends that we usually wash ashore in a business sense in Canada 3 to 5 years later. And I think that's speeding up. Now, the reverse, sadly, is true. We're importing the technology and new brands and such. We're exporting to you our regulations. I think
that's right. Thanks. Thanks for that, Tim.
I don't know why you're buying, but we are. So that's. I think your observation is right on. So I think this is very relevant for an American audience.
Right.
So the other thing that's interesting that shows the power of these ideas, frighteningly, is that typically in Canada, the most important level of government when it comes to housing and regulation is at our provincial level.
Right.
And then followed by our municipal level. It's very rare the national government is involved other than, sort of mortgage regulation. So this is unprecedented. I think for the first time in my memory in student politics, housing was a top 5 national issue in our national election campaign a few months ago. And the major areas to win between the Liberal Party and the Conservative Party tend to be in our great metro centers around Toronto, the Lower Mainland, British Columbia, Vancouver, and Montreal, where housing is a big issue. So I think just some, 20-some-year-old staffers doing polling, what's going to make a difference for us, really hit on the sensitivity, the nerve around housing, and said, okay, who do we cast as the villains? And in many ways, they looked at realtors, brokerages, and mortgage dealers as a place to point at and say, here's the source of the problem. It's a real foreboding for the U.S. side as well.
So let's talk about that. I mean, so looking at the home buyers, you know what? Let me throw that up real quick on screen, EJ. So this is what the actual thing is. So let's just go through it real quick and let me understand. What is banning blind bidding? Like, what the hell does that mean?
So do you call it blind bidding in the States? A traditional offer process? Yeah. Okay. So I'm sorry to ask that question. So basically, the premise here is that the traditional offer process was multiple offers of the contents of the offer being held private would be blown up. And anytime you blow that up, you're in some sort of auction situation, whether that's an online auction, the realtors around the table, what have you. But basically, Rob, I don't know of any other jurisdiction, a mandatory auction process under multiple offers.
Okay, so that's what that means. What is this legal right to home inspection? I mean, don't they already have legal right? Except here in the States, I mean, you have a right, but people waive it because it's just a competitive bidding situation at seller's market and whatnot. Do you guys not have that? What does this mean?
We do, very similar to the American jurisdiction. We, that little expression that you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. Basically, this sounds good, but the reality on the ground is people do have a legal right to a home inspection in every province. Right. They just waive it. I think this sounded good for their campaign.
Okay, so this is just another empty, like, hey, we're doing, but you already have it. Okay, so the next thing, total transparency. Do you not have total transparency on history of prices? I mean...
So no.
Really?
You do not, okay. Yeah. There are various encumbrances. So you could go to the land registry. It's called Terranet in our province. Yeah. I was actually involved with them in my politics days. And you could get a limited number of properties and their history. But it's a process that is a slow-moving, heavily administrative, and you're limited to how many. So unlike in many states where you go online and instantly see the history of Hudak's property and who owned it before and the prices, it is really hard to do here. Interesting.
Okay. So that's a potentially new one. This requiring real estate agents to disclose when they're doing, both sides. Like, again, this is like basic agency law. Like, do you guys not have this?
We do. In the province of Ontario, and I'm going to bet in every other province as well. I'd be surprised. We have 10 provinces in Canada. That's pretty much a basic.
Right.
Again, I think this was in run to an election. How do we get votes? And threw a few things in here without really doing the homework first, or, let's be honest about it, probably knowing this, but it sounded awfully good in the campaign.
Okay, gotcha. So it's just campaign. And then beneficial ownership registry. This one actually is something that I'm looking at. I could see this happening here as well.
Yeah.
Because one of the big things here is these big institutional landlords coming in and buying up all these homes. And I think Congress has been talking about this. So I could see them copying this. I mean, is that kind of what we're talking about here? Do we know who the owners are?
You got it. Basically taking away the veil of numbered companies and the anonymity of ownership. This is actually something, Rob, that at OREA we have pushed as well. So we're happy to see this one get on the list.
Right. So this one's interesting. Mortgages for, who knows, like whatever. This last one, though, requiring mortgage lenders act in your best interest is a bizarre one, right? Because if I'm a lender, I got to act in my best interest, right? Not the counterparty. So what does this mean, like, for you guys?
This is the one that I know the least about because I don't know all the ins and outs of the requirements of our mortgage colleagues.
Yeah.
But I suspect you're right that at the end of the day, this probably won't mean too much. Maybe you're identifying conflicts, for example, or if you have interest in another business, to put that on the table. They mentioned something called the first-time home buyer incentive. So that's a typical government program that gives you a bit of a break on your costs. So maybe they want to see more proactive use of mortgage dealers to tell you about the government programs. But that one got the least attention on the list, and it does puzzle me a little bit.
All right, so I'm going to get rid of this screen, but so that's kind of the overview of the Home Buyer Bill of Rights. It's obviously just a proposal at this point. I don't believe this is the law, but presumably the Liberal Party is they think that they're going to get a lot of political traction on this. If they get, I don't know when your next elections are, but if they're, and I think they're currently in power, so presumably we could see this being proposed and passed. So what's your take on this as a whole? I mean, what do you think of it?
Number one takeaway for the audience south of the border would be that if you don't address supply issues, and if you're not seen as being on side of buyers and sellers, the general public, your risk of being put in the crosshairs. We spend a lot of our time at OREA making sure we're seen as champions of home ownership. Nothing makes us happier than helping somebody get the keys to their first home. We played a role in raising the bar when it comes to professional standards and discipline in our profession and increasing housing supply. And I know we'll talk later about that.
Right.
But it shows the vulnerability, right? It's awfully easy. Instead of making the tough decisions around overregulation and housing supply, to target others out there like realtors or mortgage professionals. The problem is, politicians, sure, they can break promises, but surely to goodness, something on the list they're going to try to push through. And I worry the most, quite frankly, about the ban on the traditional offer process. I think that would really would undermine a foundation around privacy, drive up prices, and also limit supply in the marketplace.
Interesting. So talk to me about that last piece. How does that limit supply in the marketplace?
I just think of like my mom, right? So my mom's got the family home. My dad's passed away. It's too much for her. And she could put the house in the market. And if she's told that she can no longer use a realtor and, compare the offers that are coming in, but instead she can participate on an online auction. Mom doesn't know what a Kijiji is. And something that her parents used, grandparents have used since, Confederation in Canada is suddenly banned. I think it's going to frighten her. And I think it's more likely that she would say, I'm going to wait this out. I'm not going to put my home in the market. So I think that an already strong supply problem will become even worse if you take away the way people are accustomed to doing it.
See, what's weird about it for me, Tim, is what I really dislike about it is that it's a ban. In other words, I could make the argument that the marketplace, if left to its own devices, will eventually go to more of an auction type model. Because there are some arguments to be made where that's superior to both the buyer and the seller. What I don't like is I don't like the government stepping in and saying we're going to ban it. Like that doesn't make sense. But I could, at the same time, be a proponent of going down sort of a more open, no more blind bidding, type of thing, but voluntarily in the marketplace. Like, what am I missing on that? What's your take on it? Like, in other words, if the realtor and the client both decided, hey, let's do this as an open auction, why not?
No, look,
why not?
Yeah, I have made the same case with government. And one thing I should make clear for an audience outside of Canada is this is provincial legislation, and the federal government had talked about using it in the criminal code, which was ludicrous. The fact that they would have the RCMP and lock up my mom in that example and take it away. So, the likely mechanism would be the federal government would use funds, I guess like Reagan did with the highways, right, and the driving age, and try to get this changed by bribing provincial governments.
Gotcha.
Anyway, to your main point, we believe in OREA fundamentally that because your home is your most precious asset, both financially and emotionally, you should be in the driver's seat on how you want to sell your home. If you want to use a realtor traditional offer process, God bless. If you want to do an auction, God bless. You want to sell it yourself, that is your right and your call.
That's right.
We should have consistent consumer protection in those initiatives, but have that call. And we are seeing auction companies that are licensed, that follow rules, that are run by realtors.
Yep.
And their belief is, and their pitch on the radio, where I still do commentary, just not the show, not that I'm mad. The pitch is you can get more money through the auction, right? That's actually their pitch out there. And they'll say that by giving confidence in the system, seeing bids, it'll attract more buyers. So our position so far has been agreed to by the provincial government in Canada's largest province, consumer choice. And we actually got legislation to open up new choices. They should leave well enough alone there.
Good. All right, cool. So just out of curiosity, have the Conservatives come out with like a counter proposal to the Liberal Party's, home buyers' Bill of Rights?
So I don't know how much your audience wants to get into parliamentary democracy and the ins and outs of what's happening in Parliament. However, there has been a pact we're in a minority government, right, where no party controls Parliament.
That's right.
And a pact has been reached by the New Democrats, who are on the more socialist side, with the Liberals, who are center-left.
That's right.
To support each other until 2025. So this makes that a live option. They now have the votes, and the Democrats like a lot of what's in that platform. The Conservatives tend not to, I don't know if they made a contrary one, Rob, but their efforts so far have actually been on increasing housing supply, giving more choice in the marketplace, giving more options around mortgages. I have not seen them endorse these things, although they did have a ban on foreign buyers as part of their most recent platform. That's the more populous item on their agenda.
Oh, lovely. All right. Well, we're not going to get into the politics of Canada or anything, but we are. I mean, obviously, we are talking about politics as it pertains to housing, because that is the most important, aspect of this. But yeah, like I said, I mean, that's the beginning of this. And I do want to dive into kind of, what you guys have put forth, because that seems a little bit more realistic. But first, I'm told by my producer that this is an appropriate time for me to beg my audience to go to my YouTube channel and hit subscribe so I could get a name. That's it. Please just go search for Notorious POD on YouTube and hit subscribe so I could just get a name for my channel. just wanted to let people know about that. So having said that, Tim, let's talk about this was kind of what the Liberal Party proposed, but you guys at OREA have worked with some other organizations, and I think you were involved with a committee, a think tank, to put out some proposals for Ontario, right? So tell me a little bit about that effort.
Well, this is the alternative. And let's reinforce the main lesson that you began with, Rob, which is that you don't act to solve the problem. Misguided politicians are going to solve it for you in ways that you're not going to like. And believe me, after more than 2 decades of experience in politics, politicians do dumb things. And it's far easier to treat the symptoms with banning the traditional offer process, a 10-day cooling off period when you buy a home. All of that nonsense is heading your way unless you solve the fundamental problems. Okay, so catch up in Ontario. So our approach with the government here in our province has been focused like a laser on housing supply. We actually built more homes, Rob, in the 1970s than we did in 2010 to 2020. Like it said,
you ain't alone.
It's dereliction. So we suggested they create a task force, which they did. I had the honor of sitting on that one of 9 individuals. We tabled the report last month. That basically talked about the path ahead. You've got it on your screen. We need about 1.5 million homes over 10 years in our province to play catch up and bring affordability within reach. This is the true way to solve the problem as opposed to these other items.
Right. So at a top line, I'm just going to scroll right down to, so this is a private organization, or is this a governmental committee, or what is this task force?
Yeah, so it's by the government. The government picked 9 leaders across the board, myself, somebody from the building side, from finances. We had not-for-profits, Aboriginal housing, Habitat for Humanity, a big charity in the States were represented. Right. And do you have, when you hear task force, a government task force, Rob, does that send chills down your spine as well as things that like... just me, because I'm an anarchist. I'm an anarcho-capitalist. So I dislike anything government related. But, task force, I understand they do it. It's a committee. So typically... Right, a task force is, one of 2 creatures. Typically, it's a creature where every stakeholder imagine is around the table and they sort of hold hands and sing kumbaya and come up with some really vanilla report that sits on a shelf. Right. Or a task force is a good way to smother an issue, right? Why make a decision today that you can put off till next year? And your task force of, gray-haired folks can do that for you. This was different. So Premier Ford and his housing minister, Steve Clark is his name, gave us a month. So come back with a month's report, and I loved it because they said, be bold. Let's actually solve the problem. Don't pull any punches. You don't worry with politics. We will. So this is what we came up with, and it is the roadmap, actually, to help create that next generation of Canadian homeowners. Yeah.
So, like I said, I'll put a link to this report, in the notes. Obviously, for Canadian audiences, if I have any, please go read that because it's real relevant for you guys. But even for Americans, I think this is really worth taking a look at because, again, our systems are similar enough, right? And we know that some of the political things are going to head our way. Yeah, you guys keep exporting regulations and laws to us. So I think it's worth our while to take a look at what you guys come up with. Because again, the problems are similar. But give me sort of the top 3 big takeaways from this report, from this recommendation.
So the top takeaway would be as of right zoning, basically the right to make particular changes under certain conditions. So I'll give you a couple of examples. There's really 3 on the as of right. Number 1, we're building significant infrastructure as American cities are doing, subways, LRTs, all that stuff. You should have as of right the ability to upzone up to 14 stories, we said, along those transit routes. I mean, that's supply of housing that will be affordable and it's good for the environment. So there's number 1. As of right conversions, we do think we'll see a reduction in commercial footprint due to work from home, and certainly we got to hope from government. So the as of right ability to convert those to residential or mixed use, and as of right without going through the municipal ringer process that drives up costs and shuts down projects. The major as of right, Rob, I would say, would be the ability of a homeowner to move their home if they have a good enough size lot into multiple housing units. So, picture a wartime bungalow in, Phoenix or Albany or wherever, and it's past its prime. The homeowner wants to build it up, and in Toronto they can do so, make a 4-story monster home. That's the right. We support that. Beautiful home for one family. But if that homeowner or investor wanted to knock it down and build a duplex, a triplex, 4 units on the property, they basically cannot do that. There is such an obstacle And what happens, 4 homes for people that, are trying to get the middle class never get built.
That's right.
It was probably the most aggressive decision we made, but it would probably be the number one to unlocking affordability in our urban areas.
So the next question, I highlighted this part because you guys said depoliticize the process and cut red tape, and you talked about NIMBYism. So one of the main things I kept thinking about as I'm reading through this is, these are some great ideas. But fact of the matter is, if you guys are going to pass legislation, regulation like this at the provincial level, you're going to get NIMBY pushback from municipalities across. And NIMBYism, quite frankly, is what defeats a lot of these great ideas that, that realtor associations both in Canada and down here have proposed. It consistently get killed off by NIMBYs. You guys have addressed NIMBYism. And you've come up with some ideas. Like, what's your thoughts? Like, how do we fight this?
Number of ways. The first of all is to reduce the opportunity for NIMBYism. I described some of the circumstances, Rob, where a property owner would have the right to do these things.
Right.
And the NIMBYs couldn't drag it out through a tribunal process, or the local councillor won't play chicken and vote against a project and rally their council colleagues to do so. Quite frankly, along with the stick, you need a carrot. You do want to incent municipal behavior and reward those. So just like with state or national budgets, every year there's a juicy infrastructure fund of some kind. So they want to get the water, sewer built, the new hockey rink or what have you. You should look at, are they welcoming new neighbors, or are they trying to shut them out? And those that are creating new spaces for people, they go to the top of that list to accelerate and reward good behavior.
Right.
The third area, really is to try to take as many decisions as away from the local councillor individually, who's always going to focus on existing voters and not those who want to move in, and put it to a broader municipal or provincial scale. Hold them accountable. And if they go outside of their own rules, there would be financial penalties to municipalities who are not actually even being consistent with their own official plans.
Right. Okay. That's cool. And so here's what I loved about this. And again, I understand the task force is not just you, Tim, but you were one of the 9, I think you mentioned. And, for the longest time, I've been sort of telling the realtor associations that I'm talking to, and they don't necessarily love hearing this, but I feel like it's just an obvious truism, right? That you cannot be both for the sellers and the homeowners and for buyers and wannabe homeowners, right? Because by increasing supply, whatever it is that you're going to do to drive housing affordability, by its very nature, it's going to have an impact on the property value of existing homes, right? And I've been arguing really for, I don't know, the last 40 years. I do feel like, NAR and the realtor associations here have made more of an emphasis around protecting home values. And my argument has been, you need to switch to starting to protect sort of the opportunity to become homeowners more, even if that means you have to sacrifice a little bit on the maintenance of home value side. It feels to me like you guys have made that decision, OREA. Am I misstating that? Am I thinking too much on that?
We definitely chose this course about 4 years ago, Rob, where we said, we would become the champions of home ownership and those who want to join it, to actually increase the number of homeowners. And let me describe, the risk that exists. We're seeing this in Canada, I'm sure, in a lot of major American cities. Mm-hmm. We're cleaving our province into housing haves and have-nots. Mm-hmm. And our research at OREA has shown that, if you borrow from the bank of mom and dad, you've got a greater likelihood of winning in the bids. And if you're not, you don't come from a family of wealth or a home, you're renters, highly unlikely. And I don't know if this creature has popped up in the American discourse yet, but we actually have anti-homeownership stakeholders now who are actually saying that homeownership is overblown, government should not subsidize it, we should actually push more rentals, be more like European cities. So there are actually those who are championing. The larger that cohort gets who have never owned a home nor aspire to have one, right, the bigger impact it's going to have in public policy. You think things are tough now, right? Just wait till there's momentum behind the anti-home ownership forces that started to build in Canada. We're pushing the other way.
Right. And this is something I brought up, I think, at Reality in OREA maybe a couple of years ago. And I know I've been making this point over and over and over again, which is to say, look, boomers and then Gen X and then millennials, right? And we have been talking about millennials because of the biggest chunk of the population. I think the same is true in Canada. I know I've looked at Canadian millennial data as well, and millennial home ownership below 40%. And the point that I keep making over and over is millennials are not just the future of homeowners, they're the future of voters. So if you get to less than 50% home ownership among that population, all bets are off, right? And I think Canada, you guys have really high ownership rates. I think it's north of 60. I think we talked about 69%. That sound about right?
Yeah.
For home ownership rate?
I'm laughing here, Rob. So I thought that was my rant. One thing I learned when I was leader of the Conservative Party here in Ontario, I can steal somebody else's good idea and claim it as my own. And if I had a bad idea, I blame somebody else.
Absolutely.
So I got my rant from you when you're at Reality. I remember that was a great presentation. But we're seeing that emerging. So Canada does have higher homeownership rates than Americans. We are strong. We had been north of 71%. I think 2012 may have been the high water market. But we've been drifting down, and now we're below 69 in Ontario. Right. Still a ways to go.
65 and lower. But what's your home ownership rate among millennials? Do you guys have that stat? Do you know that off the top?
I think you were right. I mean, I remember working with you in your presentation in 2020. Yeah, I think well below 40. We're seeing, we actually did a survey of that population. Yeah. And many searching to move to other provinces or states simply based on housing. Right. We are seeing now emerging in this debate, an anti-home ownership sentiment that says we should encourage the opposite.
And this is what's great about what you guys have done, and I'm really heartened to hear it, right? Which is the realtors are starting to say, you know what, we need to embrace this, right? Because it's no longer about keeping home prices high. It's no longer about that. It's about making sure that these millennials or working families can become homeowners in the first place, and you got to get the number above 50%.
Well, just think I've been on the receiving end of these things. You go in to see your elected leaders, and you're not on side for creating more homeowners. You're not on side for rewarding those who pursue the Canadian and American dream of owning your own home. You want to stop that and try to get anything else through the system if that's the approach you take. Right.
I think it's just wonderful what you guys are doing. But having said that, I have an idea I wanted to float with you.
Yeah.
Who else can I talk to about this? So I have this crazy idea, and I think I'm going to put up a post about it. So I'm going to just do this as the thing. In terms of fighting NIMBYism, right? What do you think about the idea of creating essentially a tax on home ownership? And the idea is that it would be apportioned across number of homeowners. So therefore, you're trying to create an incentive for homeowners to back building more homes to decrease the tax burden on themselves. Is that nuts?
Pretty wild. which I count on. Rob, when I see the Notorious version of conferences or Notorious podcast.
Because, if you're going to build 1.5 million more homes, right? Obviously, there's a bunch of costs associated with that, right? Yeah. Developers are going to absorb that cost. But, and your paper points it out, municipalities, zoning, all these things, there's all these permits. There's a lot of cost behind that. And NIMBYism is a big factor. If you sort of went forward and said something along the lines of, look, we are going to start subsidizing tenants. Right. In fact, I have a sheet. I want to share it with you.
All right.
Because, and I'm going to publish this as well. So this is the idea, right? So basically the idea being you'll start with some very high tax burdens, but decrease over time as you build the homes. Because, that tax, you'll have fewer tenants, more homeowners, and then the tax essentially disappears. And on this, I'm saying by year 5, we get to 79% home ownership. I can't imagine government saying no to taxes, right? What do we think?
There's permanent as a temporary government program, right?
Exactly.
Take that away.
Until you get to 100% home ownership, or maybe get to 10%, but who knows? Maybe at that point, y'all might have a different problem. You might have too many people moved to Ontario then. Because it's either I get subsidized rent or there's more homes available where I could become a homeowner, right?
Yeah. Look, I love the unorthodox thinking. And we're going to get some here, though. I like the concept because, any government program is going to try to line up incentives with the kind of behavior that you want. And there is no doubt that the NIMBY forces impose a massive penalty on renters wanting in the housing market by driving up prices, limiting their choice, let alone how they make their lives miserable, right? As part of that. And then you can be talking about the investors who can't get maximum value for the properties. Believe it or not, we had something similar that came to the task force we talked about earlier. And I don't know, Rob, if you can explore this topic down the road, but I'll throw these guys at you. I read through, 100 some reports, but there was one called More Neighbors Toronto. It was really a millennial group of aspiring homeowners in Toronto that brought forward probably the most detailed and suggestions and many unorthodox ones. There might be future guests. So what they actually talked about before our committee was something similar where it'd be by neighborhood. So if there was a neighborhood in an urban area who pretty heavily resisted new homes out of snob zoning, that they would pay a snob tax. So they didn't call it that. That's my language. Okay. But you would have higher municipal property taxes if you refuse to allow development in your area. So you can keep your home in the shape it's in, particular color of the paint or what have you, but you would pay the price for keeping other people out.
Right. There's different, I had this idea around like median price based value added taxes. There's all sorts of crazy ideas, but the important thing is this, that basically my position on this is that realtors must be seen as being on the side of home buyers, of millennials, of those who want to become homeowners, right? I think you guys have, as OREA, have made that decision to do that. The question for you is, are you seeing results? Do you think that, say, millennials or renters now see you as allies in trying to become homeowners? Or are you still far away from, like, what's your take on how the public sees realtors in Ontario right now?
So look, a couple of my previous jobs were in politics. And then I was a border inspector for a while. So I chose positions where you're not exactly popular. So the general public will always be suspicious of everybody, right? So it's awfully tough for realtors not to have people judging them. That's the nature of life, and I've been there. But we have seen improvements as we monitor public opinion of realtors and OREA. A higher profile, definitely seeing us more on site or more information. It can swing back and forth depending on the issue, but our consistent theme of being pro homeownership and helping create that next generation of homeowners does pay off. And most importantly, I think, the results, because we have been successful with government, both the previous Liberal regime we dealt with in Ontario since I've been here, and now the Progressive Conservatives. Both parties have done other things. They for example, did increase our rebate you get when you buy a home on the land transfer tax. We have moved up. They moved on legislation to help create new business opportunities for our members and raise the bar when it comes to discipline, training, professionalism. So a lot of our top asks actually have been able to check off. And we did move the bar when it comes to progress in the housing file. So in 2018, a number of our ideas were incorporated into legislation called the More Homes, More Choice Act. And we built a record number of homes in 2021. That's not all because of the act, but it certainly helped. We gave the government some confidence. We can demonstrate we're now on an upward trend after years of plateau and decline. And it also then whetted their appetite for more. So they did bring a new legislation in 2 weeks ago into the House, which will move the ball even further down the road in a positive direction for consumer protection and home ownership.
So related to that, Tim, I think I brought this up. Reality. I know it's a message of mine forever, which is YPN. I don't know if you guys have Young Professionals Network, in Canada. I actually can't remember. I think you do. But one of the things I have noticed whenever I've traveled up to Canada, whether it's Vancouver or Toronto or elsewhere, it's y'all have some younger leaders. It's actually really kind of interesting. That I felt like, the average, here in the States, the average realtor is like 59, white female. Doesn't really seem to be the case, especially in Toronto, especially in Ontario. Are you guys doing anything sort of formally as OREA in terms of trying to activate some of your younger members to be more that voice to that, millennial younger generation who are aspiring to be homeowners?
I think you're just attracting a younger, hip, and probably better-looking crowd, Rob.
Well,
so,
I mean, if you're presenting it to me, then I'll take it. I'm just saying.
Similar things attract, right? So our demographic is similar. Average age of realtor is, I think, around 57, 58. Slightly more male than female, but pretty close to 50-50. However, on the young person side, the more important point you're making, we've really put a rocket fuel in our Young Professionals Network. James Walonis was our chair here in Ontario, who's increased the number of locals and driven up the YPN activity and membership significantly. He did that because he believes in it. He's a young leader himself, and our board believed in it and put more funds into it. It certainly helps in communicating and getting our message out at the end of the day. Similarly, right? That's bringing in some fresh ideas and a lot of enthusiasm for the kind of work we're doing on the public policy front.
Right. No. So we're almost an hour now.
Can I throw one quick thing in there? I'm sorry. It confuses the hell out of me. People debate whether we shouldn't have a YPN, and it shouldn't just be young people. It should be anybody. It's that seems nuts. I can tell you when I was in politics, the doctors had their young professionals, the insurance agents did, the dentists did, the pharmacists did, the engineers. I went to the functions regularly. I was perplexed that there's some debate in the real estate world. You should have a YPN or not. That's nuts. Of course you should. And you should get behind it.
Not only that, but I mean, like I said, the thing that I find so encouraging about this is the rest. If you're not YPN, so I'm old, right? I'm Gen X, so I almost don't count anymore. But I really felt like if I'm 35 years old today, and I'm a realtor, then my intent has to be I want to stay in business for the rest of my career, right? I mean, I'm not just in it for the next 2 years and then I'm out. I have to be thinking 10, 20 years, I would like to have the type of career that the older generations have already had. It's impossible unless you make it possible for the younger people to become homeowners. Because if you're not a homeowner, guess what? You're not selling your home 10 years from now, right? And so you have to allow them. So to me, the whole premise behind this YPN, I feel like this is their time. They have an actual mission. They have an actual thing, a vision, a mission that, quite frankly, it's not really there, for the rest of for the older generations. You know what I mean? And I couldn't shake this feeling like we're not doing enough to go to the YPN crowd and just inspiring them, letting them know this is your time. Y'all need to step up and lead, not just the Realtor Association, but your community, society, your peers who are not homeowners. They would love to be, but they're just facing this insane challenge, and they need to be able to see the younger realtors as their allies, right? And through them, they could see the entire Realtor Association as really being on their side. That was my whole premise behind it, and I just don't know that we've seen that level of consistent messaging, that level of consistent organization. And to me, like I said, you guys at OREA have taken that step forward.
It's in the path, Rob. I think you're right on. Keep doing that. It's bringing benefits here. To reinforce your point, too, that's the threat of the significant investment funds that are buying up
that's right.
homes and doing the rental, too. Those properties are not going to come back in the marketplace.
Nope.
It's kidding who. They're owned forever by a corporation.
Nope.
Can I add one last point just to some realism here, too, around the report? So our government in Ontario did move forward legislation, but a lot of the harder choices, Rob, that you outlined there were not taken. They were pushed back beyond the election for further consultation. But at least these ideas now were on the table. And the other thing that was interesting in taking these bold positions, the spectrum of support the task force received was incredible from the left, from the right, from younger, from investors. It really did get a lot of momentum. So even if the current bill did not have as many recommendations as we'd like to see, I do feel that a number of those items will come into reality in the province of Ontario based solely on the broad amount of support we got, including a lot of editorial and media support. They're finally talking about these issues. The number of NIMBYs is actually much more limited based on the public response we got.
Well, that's great. No, that's great. And, to some extent, you have to say housing is one of those things, it really shouldn't be a left-right issue. This really shouldn't be a partisan thing. It's just a problem to be solved. We have home prices are up way high. wages are not. Like, if there's some left-wing idea that's going to help solve that problem, let's consider it. If there's a right-wing idea, let's consider it. Like, we got to solve the problem. Like, that's how I see that.
Pragmatic and accurate, because this was a conservative government that brought in a task force.
Yep.
It received a lot of support from the left on the ideas in that report.
Yep. And hopefully that's something we could learn, down here, from a much nicer and gentler friends up north. But listen,
trucker convoy, though, I don't know how that's
I know you were trying to get close on time, so I just want to make one last sort of floating idea for you to consider for OREA, which is more and more, I feel like maybe the role of the Realtor Association should embrace becoming a media organization way more than just simply a lobbying organization, which is the way that we have seen it. Because ultimately, you need to reach the public, right? You need to reach the younger people. What are you guys doing anything on that front? And I mentioned this because, now that you are no longer working as a radio host, I mean, maybe OREA should be putting more of an effort towards not just you, but maybe some of the younger leadership, trying to reach out to millennials, trying to reach out to homeowners, to community as a whole. I mean, in this day and age, you don't need to be a media company. Like, what's your thought on that? Like, could or should Realtor Associations be more of a media organization?
100%. And if you're not, you're going to fall further behind. I'd love to do another show with you on that, Rob. We're aligned, and I'd have a lot to talk about. I think what we've done and some lessons that we've learned. Look, I faced, I don't know how many different organizations across the table in my previous life. And right. Those that were successful, and we've done this here, you've got to have an air war and a ground war.
That's
Real
right.
Organizations tend to focus on the ground war, which is knocking on the door, talking to your congressman and such, and they're very effective at that.
Very good. Mm-hmm.
But you need the air war. You need the air war to be in the media, to be in advertising, to be on social media, which is a threat that if they don't do what you've asked, that you can actually mobilize voters, but also to keep that debate there, because they're going to say, okay, I met my realtor, she made a good point, but if they're hearing it from their neighbors and the baker and the police officer that see your media, far more likely to get action. You need an air war to go with that ground war.
That's right. So here's to waiting to see what OREA launches. Right. I know you guys are already like way ahead of it too, which is really cool. I mean, I love what you guys have been up to. So this is great. So in terms of wrapping up, what do we not talk about that we really should have talked about, Tim?
I think we drove the main point. I'll reinforce it at the end, that if you don't put a solution on the table, you'll have it foist upon you. And the other awful one we've not talked about is a cooling off period that the British Columbia government is looking at for home purchase and the havoc that's going to create in the real estate market. And, people will often look for any kind of solution when they get desperate, no matter, who they run over. So these ideas can get a lot of traction in the public because they're increasingly desperate, and we'll grab onto them.
I agree with that 100%. So with that, thank you very much, Tim, for joining me. This has been a great conversation, like I expected it would be. Let's stay in touch, and I'm going to keep following what's happening in Canada because, again, like we said, like we keep exporting our technology and companies and ideas to you guys, and you keep exporting regulations. And singers and comedians. I want to say some of my favorite stand-up comics and musicians are actually from Canada. So do want to thank y'all for that.
Yeah, I'm curious. Throw a couple at me. Who are your favorites?
I mean, I hate to admit it, but Celine is one of my favorites. If I lose my man card because of it, so be it.
No, you just aged yourself about 20 years. That's all. But God bless. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm an old Gen X. Look at all the gray. I mean, damn.
Well, that's good. I'm thrilled to know that. It's great to see you, Rob. You're doing a fantastic job. I really appreciate having me on, and we'll look forward to having you at our upcoming conference very soon.
And by the way, if you are a U.S.-based realtor association, you need speakers, you should think about inviting Tim, to give you kind of a perspectives, what's happening, what's coming our way in a couple of years. I'm going to leave that
the bad news guy.
And thank you all for joining us on this. And like I said, if you've listened to this point, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button so I could get a name on my channel. Thank you all. Peace.